This is the first lesson of Chapter 12, where we're going to continue discussing the topic of genetics. But now we're going to be digging deeper into the idea that specific genes are found on certain chromosomes. And eventually we'll get to the fact that some of those genes are found on the sex chromosomes. That's where we'll come to with this lesson. But to start, this work that we are going to be discussing can be attributed to the studies done by a different scientist than Gregor Mendel, a man named Thomas Hunt Morgan. And he did his experiments on the organism shown here on the slide, which is a type of model organism. If you recall from one of our earlier chapters, we often use model organisms to gain an understanding of things that affect humans. But of course, it's a simplified version of maybe just one pathway in a human that we're studying in that model organism. So I was wondering if you know what this model organism is. Of course, it's a bug, but what type of bug? Well, you might notice it looks like a little fly. It's hard to tell the scale of this picture, but it is a pretty common fly that you might even see in your house when you have like ripe bananas sitting on the countertop. This is a fruit fly. The scientific name of the fruit fly that you should be familiar with because you might encounter it in your textbook or in other scientific literature that you're reading. It's Drosophila melanogaster. So what I'd like you to do is if you could pause this video and go check out this YouTube video that goes into a little bit of the history of Thomas Hunt Morgan. Unfortunately, I can share it here, but only the video, the audio won't come through as we've learned through some of our previous lessons together. So you can either go type this URL in or access the link directly from D2L and watch that video and then come back. Well, I hope you watched that video about Thomas Hunt Morgan and his contributions to the field of genetics. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about the studies that he did on the fruit flies and how this led to a deeper understanding of how certain traits are inherited on certain chromosomes. So first of all, why did he pick to study fruit flies? Why didn't he continue the work of Gregor Mendel and look at pea plants? Well, fruit flies are also good like pea plants for studies of genetics because first of all, they breed at a very high rate. You can have one generation of fruit flies every 2 weeks. So the capability of studying them in a lab is really good. Also, they have a very small genome. And so with a small genome of only 4 pairs of homologous chromosomes or a diploid number of 8, um, it means that there's fewer heritable traits to understand and observe their patterns of inheritance than an organism that has a larger genome. There'd be a lot more traits, a lot more genetic information to try to understand. And last, but probably most important as it relates to genetics and these kinds of studies that were done before there was genetic sequencing capabilities. This was like the early 1900s, by the way. So, like the pea plants, the fruit flies have several traits that are easy to observe and that are heritable, such as their eye color. I mean, look at this thing. Its eyes are like jumping out of its head. So, the eye color is the one we're going to fixate on. That was maybe mentioned in the video as well as the notable trait that Morgan used in his studies. Morgan noted that there were two varieties or two versions of the trait for eye color. There was red and there's white. He noticed that there were more flies in nature that had the wild type or sorry, the red eyes, which because there's more in nature, he called that the wild type. That term can be applied to other traits in other organisms. Wild type just means it's the one that's more prevalent in nature, versus the one that's more rare is the mutant. And for the fruit fly eye color, that would be the white eyes. So through his studies where he crossed generations and generations of fruit flies, he determined that the allele for eye color is located on a specific chromosome. And that chromosome is the X chromosome, one of the sex chromosomes. Interesting. And the way he came to this conclusion is because he noticed a pattern emerging when he was looking at the eye color and whether the eye color was affiliated with a male or a female fruit fly. So let's take a look at his experiments. Like Mendel, he ran two sequential experiments with the flies. He started with a cross between a red-eyed female and a white-eyed male. All of the F1 generation offspring of that cross had only red eyes. Then he allowed them to cross with each other. They can't really self-fertilize like a plant, but they would cross. Basically, all the F1 offspring were just kept together, and then he would see what the next generation or F2 generation of that cross was. And like with Mendel, he saw the reappearance of the white eye color, but the only ones that had the white eye in this particular F2 generation were the males. That doesn't mean that only males can have white eyes, by the way. It's just in this particular cross, and you'll see why that is later through some of our other examples. So that was an interesting finding, not only to see the reappearance of the white eye, which is, again, the recessive version of the trait, but also that it was only males and not females that had that eye color. So it's from this study that he deduced that the X chromosome has something to do with this. Now you can see below the Punnett squares for these crosses, and we'll be doing some practice problems like this to really dig into that and make sure that you understand how to do a Punnett square. So for now, you can observe those and maybe even see if you can work those out and get the same results as Morgan did. But I'm going to focus first on more of the theory behind this and how he came to know about the X chromosome linkage of that trait. So, like fruit flies, humans and several other organisms, animals that is, have X and Y chromosomes if they have male and female individuals in their population. So being a male means that they have an X and a Y chromosome in addition to their body chromosomes or autosomes, whereas a female would have two X chromosomes. So that is biologically what determines a male or a female is at birth, of whether they have the X and Y, they're male, or XX female. So what's shown here is how on the left-hand side, the male with 44 autosomes and an X and a Y chromosome would in his sperm give half the sperm the X chromosome along with 22 autosomes, and the other half of the sperm would have the Y chromosome plus 22 autosomes. However, the female will only give her eggs or ova 22 autosomes and one X chromosome. She doesn't have any Y chromosomes, so every single egg would have an X. So it's actually the male and which sperm, whether it carries X or Y, that determines the sex of the offspring based on which sperm fertilizes the egg. So now that you understand how males and females differ in terms of their chromosome makeup, we know that males and females are different biologically. Why is it that the chromosomes X and Y are different? And how does that make males and females so unique from each other as different sexes? The sex chromosomes, X and Y shown here, not only are they different sizes, but they carry different genetic information. As shown on the left, the X chromosome is significantly larger than the Y chromosome, which just means that it has the potential to carry more genetic information. Now you might be wondering, well, why do females have more DNA basically than males, and how does that affect a male or a female differently? Well, there's actually a mechanism that maintains the amount of genetic information, conserves it between a male and a female, and we'll learn about that in another lesson of the chapter. They're called, I'll just give you a hint, it's called a Barr body. It's an inactivated X chromosome. But for now, let's just focus on what makes those chromosomes different as they are shown here. X is larger than Y, and also they have unique coding regions. This NPX and MSY, those are unique to the X and Y chromosomes. So the NPX is unique to the X chromosome, and the MSY is unique to the Y chromosome, meaning that a male wouldn't have the genetic information that a female has in NPX, and a female wouldn't have the genetic information that's coded by the MSY region on a Y chromosome. I hope I've said that enough times that it makes sense. All right, I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but let me focus now on the part that is actually homologous. That's the PAR at the top. That's an abbreviation. Of course, these are all abbreviations. And you can read more about those in the notes of the slide if you're interested, what that stands for, and a bit more about the science. And I found that in an article outside of your textbook. So for additional information, check out the notes, download the slides. But what I want to make a note of here is that the PAR is homologous for both the X and Y chromosomes. So if crossing over could occur between these chromosomes, it would only be in that PAR region. And it would only happen for a male who has an X and a Y. It wouldn't happen in a female because she already has two X's and there's no such thing as two Y's that we know of. Okay, so where we're going with this is that certain traits are found only on the X and only on the Y, and those traits might be something we see in males or females, or like with the fruit fly eye color, we know from Morgan's work that the gene for the eye color is found on the X chromosome in the flies. So we're going to be talking more about the fruit fly, but also relating this to humans so that it's hopefully more relatable to you. And we'll do that in our next lesson. We'll be looking at some of the human traits that are X-linked, like the fruit fly eye color.